Hello, everyone. Welcome to or welcome back to Provision. Today we have an exciting episode talking about product market fit with Sean from ProFounders and also today's special guest, Matt Lerner. Before founding startup called Strenghts, a company that offers online training and growth coaching workshops to European founders and their teams, Matt was a VC at 500 startups where he led operations in London and investments into 35 early stage companies. Prior to this, he spent 15 years as a growth marketer in Silicon Valley, including 10 years at PayPal. Matt is also the author of Growth Hacking for Founders, so we're super excited to have an expert on Provision. Matt, thanks very much for joining us today.
Thank you for inviting me.
Today we'll be putting questions from the community to you about product market fit. As before, we'll throw up the clock for 90 seconds per answer. But as with some of our other guests, and to get a Super Bowl reference in for the two Americans in the room today, I will give you a little bit of leeway and let you run into overtime per question.
Well done, VK. Okay, excellent. What sport is the Super Bowl, VK? Let's just to really test you.
NHL. No, I'm joking. So without further ado, I'll get the ball rolling, and why not set the scene with a fairly broad question here. What is product market fit?
All right. I mean, it's usually sort of defined in this circular fashion, but basically, I think Mark Andreessen was the first person to sort of use the term, and he said that people are biting your hand off to get your product. Another great quote, definition, Elad Gil said, if people are still using your product even when it's broken. So that immediately resonated with me because I thought about PayPal. In 2004, during the Christmas season, we had an 8-day outage and people kept using the product. People were annoyed as hell, but after they got the system back up, they kept using the product and the growth continued unmitigated. So,
Got it.
Yeah, like when people say, do I have product market fit? I usually say, if you're not sure, you don't.
It's interesting. So we always try to think about it from an investor perspective because we have to try to think about scalability of different businesses, right? And so the first thing we think about is do people love the product? And the simplest metric that we try to say is, okay, do they come back? Like, do you have decent retention, right? And then the second is, great, so you've got one person who loves it. How do you find 2, 3, 4, 5? And so then we try to say, okay, do you have a mechanism to find new customers? And if it's kind of some combination of those, and for different businesses, you expect different things, right? So for an early stage business, it's much more about do they love it and less about the acquisition side, but it's somewhere in that XY matrix of those two that you're feeling good about things.
Got it. And so I guess on that point, guys, is there a magic kind of number? Is there one metric that people should be tracking, or is it kind of this combination of a bunch of different things, and when they all coalesce, you sort of feel that you've got it?
I guess on the metrics side, it's probably more helpful to talk about what metrics tell you if you're getting warmer, because most great startups will have like a North Star metric that is sort of the culmination of their value delivery moment that everything leads up to, whether it's weekly active users or number of transactions or gross merchandise volume. But the question is like, how do you know if you're getting close? And I think back to what Sean said, there's several components of product market fit, right? Do you have language market fit? When people see your marketing or your landing page, do they say, hell yeah, I want that? Is there a good out-of-box experience and short time to value? When people start mucking about with the product, do they very quickly understand the value of it? And then hopefully that leads to really good retention. So I guess what you're looking at, depending on and you've got to nail all of those, right? They're links in a chain. So depending on what area you're focused on, your metrics are going to be some sort of, usually like a conversion rate or a qualitative metric, a ratio of users that says, yeah, people are understanding this message. So people who see this landing page have a high conversion rate to free trial. People who start trying the product have a high conversion rate to retained users, and retained users stick around. So you're sort of looking at numbers that indicate the strength of those different links in the puzzle.
I wouldn't even pretend to be able to write a book about this the way Matt has. So I was chatting with one of our companies yesterday, VK, that you know, and I know we're running out of time, but we were talking about how do you know kind of when it's there. And I think we had two things that are definitely not technical. One was, do you have the oh wow moment? So the first time you use it, you're like, oh wow, that's cool. And the second is the so what. And so the so what is, okay, so great, that was cool, but what is the purpose of it? Matt, and you're of a similar age to me. The first time you used Google, versus any other search engine, you were like, oh wow, like this works. It's not filled with ads. It's not a disaster. It gets me the right answer. And that's the so what, right? Like it just works and it gets me the right answer. And I think all companies need the oh wow and the so what as quickly as they can.
Got it. Okay, cool. So staying on the same kind of tack, but kind of focusing on one methodology, I did some reading before around Sean Ellis and this survey that he does to try and get a feel for whether a company in the early stage has product market fit. I know there are also other different methodologies around asking your customers. When you have limited time with your customers, are there certain questions that you should really focus on asking and prioritize asking them? Or do you have any recommendations? Because I guess you don't have infinite time with your customers.
So I guess, just to clarify the question, VK, are you wondering what questions should I ask my customers to try to find product market fit, or to measure whether I have it using the Sean Ellis framework?
I guess we can start with the first, and then we can go to the second as perhaps the next question.
Okay, so I'll sort of cover them both then. So the way the Sean Ellis framework goes is he was one of those like hired gun growth people that investors would bring into companies. And so he'd work with them first just on a consulting basis, and he would survey their customers to decide if he wanted to actually work for them for equity. Is kind of the genesis of the story. And so he'd survey the customers and he'd say, if, Dropbox or whatever the product was, log me in, these are some of the companies he worked with, disappeared tomorrow, how disappointed would you be? Somewhat disappointed, very disappointed, not disappointed. I did those in the wrong order. And he figured out, sort of finger in the air, that if more than 40% of customers would be very disappointed, then they probably have product market fit. People really depended on them. Just like Sean Seaton Rogers was saying, if Google went away, that would make your life quite difficult. In terms of finding product market fit, though, the things I'm going to ask my customers are really to understand the context that the product fits into their life. So what were you trying to do when you found this product? How would you have been trying to do that previously? What does success look like? Why are you trying to achieve that? And what are you nervous about when you figure out which product you're going to use for that thing? So it's much more of a qualitative approach. Sorry, I used almost all the time.
No, that's okay. That's exactly what it's there for.
It's I was trying to think about it again from the investor perspective, how the investor can start to realize this, because there's founders kind of getting it, there's external customers getting it, and then there's investors starting to see that this is resonating. And in the end, we can't go out and sort of start surveying the customers, right? We can look at Trustpilot reviews, and we used to look at Twitter a lot to see sort of commentary on the product. But in the end, it has that love has to manifest itself somewhere, right? And I think kind of bringing that back to a metric that can be shared both internally and then externally with other investors is meaningful. And I guess, it's simple, but maybe it is just it's retention, right? It's engagement, and what defines good engagement, good retention, differs by the product itself. But clearly that is one of the purest measures that one could use.
I think when I was investing, I just sort of would look at how hard is this product to market? Because I think when products don't have product market fit, it's sort of like pushing string, and they're really trying to maximize around that stuff. And when they do, it's the returns on ad spend and things like that just tend to work a lot better.
Right.
Got it. So actually, before I tie in product market fit to perhaps fundraising and spending money, etc., our last question, since we touched on the survey, how powerful and do you think you really are able to survey customers? I know there's this old adage about, Henry Ford asking customers and they'd say, they want faster horses. Can you really survey customers to get insights on this?
Well, a survey, it's a tool and it does a certain job. So it's perfectly good to tell you what percent of your customers would be disappointed or not. But if you're trying to find product market fit, then surveys are completely useless. And it really needs to start with what I was saying before, qualitative insights on the context of what is the progress they're trying to make in their lives, and they're looking at different tools and options, and what's going to help them do that. So you want to understand, what were you trying to do in the first place? What options did you consider? What were the criteria you used to select the product? And what does success look like for you? And you need to just listen to customers and get really clear on that. surveys often, people tend to think inside out and presuppose, is this feature more important or is that feature more important? And usually, in a customer's head, very little bit of the journey is actually about the product. And so much more of it is just around where they're struggling and what they're trying to do, and even emotional stuff, like how they want to feel. I interviewed someone yesterday evening about a purchase of one of those remarkable, like fake paper notebook things. I just couldn't believe how much emotion was tied up in this guy's relationships with his notebooks. He got really worked up over it. So, and you miss all that with a survey.
I have nothing to add to that.
Got it. So, you're both, or you were Matt, and you currently are Sean, early stage investors. Does a founder have to have product market fit before raising money?
Sean, would you mind going first on this one? Because you and I invest at different stages.
We are, and actually, even within ProFounders, we invest at different stages here, right? So we have it's called 65 million euro fund. We're writing checks that range from $500,000 up to 2 million, and that means we find ourselves straddling this sort of pre-product market fit and post-product market fit sort of paradigm ourselves, right? So when we invest pre-product market fit, if we're honest, we are poor judges of the product and really whether there's going to be kind of exponential demand for it. And in the end, we're making a bet on the team, right? And we're basically saying we think this team has done a good job in articulating a problem to us, even if we don't know what that problem is. And we think they can do a good job in solving it. Now, when we invest a little bit later into rounds of call it 3 to 5 million euros, there needs to be some semblance of product market fit, right? And again, that comes down to, sometimes for us, metrics, right? So what are the unit economics? What are the acquisition tools that you have in place? What does retention look like? And we start to try to build an assessment of the scalability of that business. But again, it depends on the stage, right? What you have to have achieved.
So I was at 500 startups, and they're traditionally pre-seed, accelerator, first money in. So kind of almost by definition, most of the startups either didn't have product market fit, or I can think of one investment I made where they had it, but they didn't realize it, thankfully, until after we signed the documents. But I think our best scenarios were cases where, and remember I break the problem into parts, where they had product market fit in the sense that the product worked very well and solved the need for customers, but they didn't yet have language and channel market fit. So they hadn't really locked in their routes to market. And that's where I, as an experienced marketer, could come in and help them sort that out. Because frankly, that's a much quicker and faster, easier problem to solve, because you don't have to write code usually to solve it. And so those, I think, were the kind of the best success stories. But if you're applying to, early stage accelerator, normally it's not expected to have product market fit. So as Sean said, they're going to be looking a lot at the team, but also, the market and what do you have in terms of the product itself so far? What can that team do?
Got it. And so without wanting to put words in your mouth, it sounds there, and we had a question on this, it sounds there like you need to prioritize product market fit before you start worrying about user growth. Would you sort of agree that it's that order, or would you perhaps disagree?
I mean, I'd put it actually in much stronger terms than that. I'd say one of the number one, if you sort of work through it from first principles, why do startups fail? Because they run out of money, okay? But why do they run out of money? One of the main reasons is that they try to scale growth before they have product market fit. And they start just pumping more money into hiring people and running ads and building landing pages and things. And they just don't, they haven't figured out the right customer segment. They haven't got their language right. Maybe they don't have the right product. The funnel is leaky. But they're trying to force hitting these certain targets for like fundraising deadlines, or I don't even know why. So if you try to scale before you have product market fit, it sort of accelerates your burn rate and shortens your runway. And the problem is that finding product market fit takes a long time. And not only that, but it's a journey of indeterminate length. So Airbnb, it took them 5 years. Slack took 7 years. And Ivan says he's been working on Notion for 10 years before it became an overnight success. So if you're shortening your runway, like that's the worst possible thing you can do. I think the problem is it's very hard for people to be honest enough with themselves and with their investors to say, hey, we don't have product market fit yet, so we're not going to try to scale. We're really going to just focus on experiments to try to deepen our appeal with our customer base.
Yeah, mean, it's what is the old joke about, we lose money on every product we sell, but we'll make it up in volume. It's not true, right? So you just need to be very judicious in the early days. And then once you've got kind of clear line of sight of what product market fit is, then you can get into a lot of different strategies about how you build towards a fundraising, and you accelerate, and you do take on losses, but you do it in the interest of kind of gaining share and so forth. But in the early days, you got to be very, very careful.
Right. So actually, sort of following on, a question from me here. I've had a lot of discussions recently about white glove onboardings, really walking customers through at the start before you get them into your product. Clearly, there's a trade-off here because doing a 50-minute interview takes a lot of time. So you're trading off time with growth and getting more users on board. But clearly, as well, it helps the product market fit. What do you think of white glove onboardings? Do you think they're a really useful tool? Do you think they are applicable everywhere, so for every single type of product, or do you only think they're applicable in certain types of products?
I mean, I think if I were going to speak in general terms, I'd say that, for the most part, companies are just not nearly close enough to their customer experience. And certainly not, at that onboarding stage is really when an outsider is coming in with fresh eyes and seeing your product for the first time, which is really the perfect opportunity. It's hard if you've been working and building your product from the inside for years to be able to think about it with those fresh eyes. So I think in the early stage, it's an absolutely critical best practice for everybody to learn, founders and product people to really learn about their product. Now, set that aside, whether this makes sense at scale, well, yeah, if it's, $5 monthly recurring revenue product, it's going to be hard to justify it. So you need to get to a point where the unit economics makes sense. I mean, we were doing this in PayPal in 2007, but we used a propensity model to score new signups, and people who propensed to be high value customers, we gave them a white glove onboarding experience. And, the 90% of people who propensed to be low value customers, we didn't. And we did that in a test and control way. And the people who got the white glove experience ended up being worth about 40% more on average over the lifetime of the customer, which is, I don't need to tell you, if you can do something and increase the value of your signups by 40%, that's pretty amazing, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That's actually an interesting way of segmenting people. I haven't really heard people talk about segmenting them before they actually decide whether to give them a white glove. So on a slightly different point then, and we touched on Sean Ellis's framework before, if you are using tools to identify whether you have product market fit, and you sort of start to get the feeling that you have product market fit, but it's only for a very niche customer segment, what would you recommend a founder do? Do you think that they should double down on this niche customer segment? Or if they worry that it's too small, do you think they should instead start focusing on trying to get product market fit with a different type of customer segment?
So the very first thing I would do is I'd find some of these customers and I'd get on Zoom with them. And I try to understand not just like who they are from a persona standpoint, they're marketing directors and SMEs and blah, blah, blah. But I try to understand the context in which what were they trying to do, and in what context did they find your product, and what were this alternative, what were the other ways they had tried to do this, and how did that fail? And I just try to get my head around like the shape of the problem. And then once I understood the shape of the problem, as they see it, that would kind of give me a sense of whether that's a bigger market or not out there, and if there's lots of kind of adjacent use cases of other people trying to do that or not. And I think that's the information I would then need to make a decision. It might be this is a great product and I just need to talk about different features because lots of people are trying to do it, they're just not using that language. Or maybe say like, this is weird and specialized and we can't build a business around these freaks. So I think first thing is just to understand that context from those customers. But that's a really good place to start.
I mean, having a base, having a wedge into a customer segment goes a long way, right? I mean, I almost hate to admit this. I hate to admit it, but I met TransferWise, Tavet, insanely early. He was one of the first people to use TransferWise. And they had a great customer segment of kind of quite wealthy people transferring money for their summer holidays and for weekend cottages and so forth. And I used it. I was like, this is great, but how many people have this problem, right? This cannot be a big problem. It turns out actually it's more than you might think, and it's a great wedge in to be able to kind of expand from there, right? And it turns out a lot of people move a lot of money all the time, right? I mean, I know this is not blinding insight now, and frankly, it shouldn't have been blinding insight even back then. The size of the money transfer sort of problem out there, but you never know if you're actually underplaying how big of a problem it is and how many other people can have it, especially if you're changing the paradigm. If you're lowering the cost dramatically, you actually end up expanding and growing a market 10x, 100x over, right?
I had one like that when I was an investor. Thriva pitched me, and I'm like a crazy health nut. So they said, well, you poke yourself and you drip your blood into a vial and you mail it off to a lab. And I was like, wow, I would love this product, but that's because I'm a weirdo freak. I'm really worried, are normal people ever gonna buy this? And then they pulled out their Facebook ad results and said, well, look, we're getting normal people to click these ads and our unit economics look like this, and they're activating and they're retaining. And I said, oh, okay, in that case, that's good news.
Yeah, so. Indeed.
Got it. So actually a question here around sort of what you touched on there, which was, getting on the phone and speaking to your customers. In an early stage business, whose responsibility is product market fit? Does it fall with the CEO? Does it fall with the CTO? Does it fall with the head of product? Is it everyone's problem?
It's everyone's problem. And anything short of that will not work. If the founder does not personally own this, it's not going to work. If they try to make it just the product team, it's not going to work. If they try to make it just the marketing team, it's not going to work. Literally the entire company, tiny little company, needs to align around that.
Yeah, I mean, I get quite worried if it was a sort of a pre-seed business, pre-product market fit, and they had a chief product officer, right? I mean, that just sounds absolutely ridiculous for what they're doing. So it's everyone needs to be aligned to that one goal for the business, which in the early days is building something that people love. Coming back to the oh wow moment, right?
I think a lot of people in startups, they try to build like little miniature versions scaled down of big companies, with a finance department and a product department and a marketing department. And as a startup, you don't have many advantages. You don't have more people, you don't have more money, you don't have brand recognition. The one thing you have is that you're nimble and you can move fast. And if you start trying to build these little org silos in like a 17-person company, you're creating this unnecessary friction that's really going to slow you down and give away like your one key advantage.
Absolutely. I have to say I've seen that personally, so I feel the pain there. On that point around being nimble, a question here around sort of iteration and speed. I guess when you're trying to find product market fit, you're constantly doing these tests and trying to figure out what's working, what's not. Do you have any advice on sort of the optimal cadence or the length of these tests? Does it really just vary from situation to situation, or is there kind of like a best practice here?
So I guess I should say that the angle I come at this from is very much that of a marketer. So before I would build a feature, I would test if people, I would try to sell it and test if people want to buy it. And a good nimble team can run multiple marketing experiments per week. And that's exactly why I start with marketing. If you're building product stuff, obviously optimized lean product sprints are fast, but they're nowhere near being able to run them in 1 to 2 weeks. But cycle times is absolutely the metric that you need to optimize. In fact, Sean Ellis was, a couple years ago, he was here and we were chatting, and he said, I think that for early stage startups, their North Star metric should be number of experiments run per month. Because if you're trying to find product market fit, it is a long journey, and until you're trying stuff and failing, you're not learning. And so the faster you can cycle through those, the better.
Yeah, the great thing about marketing experiments is they're quite discrete, right? And you can kind of measure up to a certain point, and the efficacy then, and then obviously product maybe takes over from there. The problem with trying too many product things is you can't isolate kind of individual attributes, right? And what's actually making the difference. So they tend to be, linear, not or serial, not parallel, right? Experiments. Whereas marketing can be parallel. So that just means the efficiency rate is much higher on the marketing side. But it's the way it is. Unless I suppose you've got absolutely massive tech team and absolutely huge numbers of users that you can then start to run product experiments in parallel. But usually early stage companies can't afford to do that.
And once you've built a product feature, even if it's not successful in deepening your fit, that feature doesn't go away, right? It becomes technical debt that you've got to maintain and support and document. Every time there's a new iOS release, you've got to, recode it, refactor it. So it's got an ongoing cost.
Got it. So I guess because we're running on time, it probably makes sense to come with the last sort of question. And, you know, to that point, there's a lucky person submitted a question here on, you know, having product market fit. Does that mean that, you know, we're done, peace out almost, we don't have to worry? Or what should I be thinking about in terms of, you know, making sure that we maintain product market fit?
So I think the best answer, I don't remember who said this, but they summed it up beautifully. They said that trying to find product market fit is like pushing a boulder up a hill, and having product market fit is like pushing a boulder down a hill. And they're both incredibly stressful, hard work, but they're just completely different kinds of work. Yeah, I mean, when you've got product market fit, you know, you're trying to double the size of your company every 9 months and not screw up your culture and keep, you know, your supply chain and the engine running, and like growing a company from 10 employees to 100 to 1,000 to 10,000 over a series of a few years is insanely hard work. Like, congratulations to your investors and your upside, but your own psychological and emotional health, oh boy, it's tough.
I absolutely love that quote, Matt. I'd not actually heard that one. I'm not sure how I missed it. I'm going to add it to my, it's going to be my top 3 now, which I kind of used liberally to describe way too many scenarios. My favorite actually all time is Mike Tyson. Someone was asking Mike Tyson about somebody's in a box, and they go, you know, he said he's got a plan for you. And Mike Tyson said, everybody's got a plan until I hit him in the face. Which I think is absolutely fantastic, right? Because the best laid plans go awry, and things always don't go according to plan. My other favorite is you know, how do you know when you've got product market fit? How do you know when you've got momentum? People always say, oh, when should I come back to you? How do I know when it's working? And I always borrow from the U.S. Supreme Court case, which was about pornography, and the Chief Justice said, I don't know how to describe it, but I know it when I see it. And that, I think, is a lot of times with early stage businesses. With every company, it's I'm not sure exactly what the metrics should be, but you know it when you see it.
I think there's something about that quote which kind of sums up why it can be quite a tricky issue to kind of grasp. You know, there's no one thing, but you sort of know when you see it. So I think that's why so many founders definitely kind of struggle with it or have an issue with it. Cool. So that's all we really have time for. We've breezed through roughly 13, 14 questions. Matt, thank you very much for your time. As you saw, we gave you a little bit of leeway on the 90 seconds, but it was a really good discussion to have. And it was great to get your insight there. Thanks.
Sure thing, VK. And Sean, great to see you. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for joining us, Matt.